Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go. Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to the Modern Leadership Podcast, where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Mitchell Levy. Mitchell is a global credibility expert, TEDx speaker, and international best-selling author of over 60 books. He is an accomplished entrepreneur who has created 20 businesses in Silicon Valley, including 4 publishing companies that have published over 800 books. I could go on, but let me get to the point. He helps experts be recognized for their expertise. For example, in a 2-hour interview, his team can ghostwrite your book, publish it, distribute it, and make you an Amazon bestseller in about 4 months. So let's get going. Mitchell, how are you today?
I'm awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
There was a big gap in that intro where I said I could go on. And really, you have done so much. But take us back. Talk to us a little bit about this 20 businesses that you've created. What, you can't hold a job? What's going on?
Well, I've been in Silicon Valley for 35 years, and everyone talks about being a parallel entrepreneur so you can stay focused. Or actually, let me rephrase that, a serial entrepreneur so you can stay focused. Sorry, I'm a parallel entrepreneur. So, as much as I sat on the board of a public firm, I've run a CEO networking group, actually a bunch of groups for about 10 years. I've created a conference myself and ran 4 conferences for Comdex, which is the largest conference company. I've created 4 executive business programs. None of that really matters. What matters is who's your customer and how are you serving them? And then what would happen is, instead of taking a single company and trying to grow it and get fun, by the way, having sat on the board of a public company, I like running my own company. I like being the person who provides the culture, not just for me, but for the people who work with me. And I'm not beholden to a quarterly investor.
Yeah, investor meetings and all of that. How about the size of the company, right? You run smaller companies as opposed to larger, or does that not matter?
It doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is how, and maybe this happens longer term when we all work from our homes and we're all working in mini entities of a potentially larger company. And so the world in which not just the CEO, but all of the employees that work with you matter, that everyone has an opinion, that everyone is their own, whether or not it's a small company or a large company, everyone's their own little entrepreneur. And if they want to come up with a good idea and try it, they have money, funding, and potentially can outsource to Upwork or Fiverr and get it done for them. And I just think that makes life more fun.
Well, it certainly adds variety. And I look at some of the stuff that you're doing today, some of the stuff I'm doing today, and 10, 15 years ago, it just wouldn't have been possible because it would have been impossible to scale. But now, as you mentioned, Upwork or Fiverr or these different freelance companies that allow us to delegate some of our responsibilities to those who are better at it than we are. It frees up our time to really focus on what we're good at. And then as far as you go, you bounce all around. I mean, you do a lot of different things. And that's where the question comes in. How do you juggle all those balls? How do you prioritize? I'm going to do this over that. I'm going to write today. I'm going to podcast. I'm going to do all this. How do you prioritize?
So it's interesting. Everyone says you should focus. My entire life, people say you should focus. And actually, I'm going to say yes. You should absolutely focus. And what I'm going to say is what you have to focus on is who is the audience you're serving. Because if you focus on the audience you're serving, it doesn't matter if you serve them with one company or 10 smaller companies or maybe even 10 larger companies, right? So what's interesting is when I do the interviews and the interviews, remind me to come back to calendar because Calendarly is the answer to that. So when I do the interviews, I have question one. And question one, 98% of people can't get right because we've been trained to talk about the value proposition. The value proposition starts with, I do this, we do that. Well, there's a segment of the population, when you say I or we as the first words coming out of your mouth, they think you're a salesperson and they don't hear the next 30 seconds. So I say to people, what is your CPOP? What is your customer point of pain? That's the first question in the interviews we're doing. And I want a response that is between 3 to 5 seconds, 1 to 10 words, right? And so if you can thoroughly define what your CPOP is. So to answer your question, my favorite 2 CPOPs, one person said miscommunication. And then I go, oh, tell me more. Another person said profitability. Let me give you mine for the publishing company. And then this morning, I came up with mine as the global credibility expert. As a publishing company, busy, successful professionals looking for more credibility with a book and have no time. Like, oh, I get it. I know who you are. I know who you serve.
I either fit in that audience or I don't. And one of the things I often talk about is your marketing should cause people to run. They should either run to you because they identify exactly what you're talking about and they need the service that you're providing, or they're going to run away from you because they know that you're not a good fit for them and you don't need to spend your marketing or your production time and dollars on people that aren't going to be your ideal customer. There's plenty of other ideal customers out there.
Jake, I want to add one more to that. So the answer is yes. The yes, and let's do the and. You want people to run towards you, run away from you, or easily recommend you to one of their friends who needs you.
And I think you're adding an additional point here that really takes us kind of to the master's class of relationships and so on. It's not just creating that one level relationship between you and me or between the people that we do business with, but it's that referral relationship that says, not only can I do business with you and should we probably do business together, provided you're a target audience of mine, but we have a relationship strong enough that you're going to recommend me to your friends, family, and neighbors.
Yes.
A lot of that comes down to credibility. So in your intro, in your bio, we talk about you being a global credibility expert. And you are doing something pretty amazing right now in that you are doing one of the most comprehensive studies of credibility out there. And I want to have you talk about that just a little bit. But first off, tell us, why is credibility? First, what is credibility? And second, why is it important and why now?
Great. It's like 3 or 4 questions, so I'll do my best at answering all of them, and then ping me if I don't. So first, what is credibility? So I will, and part of this study, so I'm interviewing 500 thought leaders on credibility, and I will come up with a new definition of credibility. I already have 3 or 4 new terms that we're going to introduce to the marketplace. One of them being Cred-dust. We can go back to that one. And what I'll say is, here's what credibility is today. Credibility is defined in the dictionary as the demonstration of trustworthiness. To be trustworthy, and I did a TED Talk on this, to be trustworthy, I've defined it as having integrity, authenticity, and showing vulnerability. And so it is basically being credible is demonstrating those attributes. Okay. Now, let's take it a step further. In today's world where we're all connected, in today's world where we could have as many meetings, I typically do 15 to 25 meetings a day. That's why I use a calendar tool, which is one of the things I said to come back to. I can't do what I do unless people automatically schedule time on my calendar. Either my team, my customers, my prospects. I don't play with calendars. And somebody said to me, Mitchell, you're a low-level guy, don't you? You're a low-level guy because you don't have an admin who's managing your calendar. And I'm like, well, that's okay. I've got a program called Calendarly, and maybe you should think to yourself that you're living in an old paradigm, right? Anyhow, so the thing that's interesting in terms of credibility and doing these credibility episodes, with all the things that come away from us, I've come up with one simple sort of demonstration of credibility. And what I'm going to say is, show up when you show up. And what that means is, if you have, like in here, just so you know, Jake, I was sitting there waiting for you 15 minutes before you came on. Why? Because I believe showing up when you show up means coming early, being prepared, and coming with your heart. So one of the things that when we're doing these studies, when I share the results, do you mind if I dive in just quickly on something that sort of shocks me and probably
let's talk about it.
All right. So here's what's interesting. I didn't know when we started doing the interviews what I needed to keep track of. I basically put a system in place, and the system made it easy. So when you sign up for an interview, you get a number of email reminders. One of them includes a video on how to prepare. It's a 4-minute video on how to prepare for a 6 to 8 minute interview. And so what happens is, first thing I do is I ask people, hey, have you watched the video? Only 60% of people watch the video. Like, oh, that's interesting. Now, I don't give people a hard time because that's not the entire study. Some people end up canceling or postponing. Oh, sorry, dog ate my homework. Can we do it another time? And my response typically, yes, we could do it anytime you want. Just don't ask me. Just go into the calendar tool and reschedule because
it'll automatically happen. And
what happens is I started keeping track of people coming on time. And what's interesting is the most wealthiest people we interviewed come early, and early is being defined as 10 minutes or so beforehand. 49% of people come on time. Now, these numbers will change, obviously, as we do more, but 49% come on time, which is between 9 minutes and 3 minutes. No, 9 minutes and 4 minutes. Now, what's shocking is 21% of people come late. So if you're doing a podcast, and particularly doing a podcast that goes live or a VCast that goes live, if somebody comes between 3 minutes and 0, they're late. And now here's the even shocking part. 6% of people, so 14 people out of 250 actually come after the half hour. So let me ask you this. You're being interviewed by the global credibility expert on your credibility, and you think it's credible to come after the half hour for a live show. And you're like, so you hear that and you go, of course, that's not credible. But you know what? 14 people did it because in the industrial age, in the society we live in today, we want to stack these meetings together and we want to go from time to time. And it is okay to come late to a meeting. Let me tell you this. It is not.
You know, it's very interesting that we talk about this because you were ready 15 minutes before. I was sitting here on my end. I had my headphones on. I had my microphone out 5 minutes before. I could see that you were on because we're using Skype and because Skype will have a green dot when you're ready. But we started right on time. I'm not sure if you noticed, but as soon as the clock struck the time of our appointment, your phone started ringing because that's the way that we do things around here. Now, as you mentioned, other people have different definitions. You know, you would say you're early if you're 10 minutes or greater. You're on time if you're 4 to 9. How do we know that that's the convention versus being right on time, me calling right as the clock strikes the hour?
Oh, no. So this is a great question. And what I'm going to do is just come up with a set of definitions because we've been taught so many things wrong. So, for instance, I mentioned if you think on time is starting exactly on the hour, I'm going to say if you're a podcaster and you're going live, on time is definitely coming 4 minutes or before. So somebody needs to define, and we haven't had that somebody yet. So I'm going to be that somebody. What I'm going to say when somebody says to you, "What do you do?" Please, please, please don't start with "I do this." What you want to do is you want to say the customers I serve, or you just say customers I serve typically have this, and then you go into the pain point they have.
Well, we got to dig into this a little bit because this is super important. So in addition to running this podcast, I also run a law firm. I'm a lawyer that does an estate planning law firm. And so you ask me the question, you say, "Jake, what do you do?" And I start and I say, "I run a law firm. I'm an estate planning attorney. I do estate plans. I do wills and trusts." All three of those are incorrect according to what you just said. So help me out and help our listeners out. How do we need to be responding, and why should we respond differently than "I do this"?
So Jake, if we can spend, by the way, I'm happy to spend the time and we could just do self-coaching with you and we'll just do it live. Or I could just give you a quick answer and then we could go on. But typically what happens, and this is what's super beautiful, in the interview sessions, I have a half hour only set up. We do the first 10 minutes where we're actually going through the 5 questions. And when I say to somebody, "What's your CPOP?" and tell me about 3 to 5 seconds, and they give me a value proposition that's 30 seconds long, I go, "Can you shorten that? Any way you can get that to 10 words?" And they go, and when I see the hesitation, if I heard a good value prop, I can shorten it, right? So if I'm thinking about you and what you just said, you could say families that are not prepared for a catastrophic event tomorrow. And then you just fill in, like, what is that? When you say, what do? You say, families or individuals that are not prepared for succession of their finances. Or, it's just, you'll come up. So what I would normally say is, hey, tell me what you do. Let's spend 5-10 minutes doing that. But there's a lot of other things we can cover in the interview.
What's the importance of me doing that? What does it do for my clients? Help our listeners understand as they're thinking, hey, I'm a real estate agent. Hey, I'm a dentist. Hey, I'm a doctor. Help me understand why, Mitchell, that I approach it this way.
Well, what happens is if you can keep what you say in a short period of time, the significant other, the spouse, the friend of the person who needs you will remember it. So mine as a global credibility expert, I really just made this up this morning. What is my CPOP? Humans that want to be seen as credible, right? You can't not forget that. You love that double negative.
I can't not.
Exactly. Thank you. It's one of those things like, if somebody says, hey, I want to be credible, if you've heard this show, you're like, oh, wait a second. Isn't that Mitchell Levy guy? Doesn't he do that? So what you want to do, and by the way, I want to be global in terms of the reach of that understanding, so multiple languages. But if you're running a business where you just need to be known in the Phoenix, Arizona area or in the Silicon Valley area, your thought leadership, your awareness, your knownness only has to be known in that geographical area or in that function area you play. And if that's what you do, and let's use Phoenix, if your target market is Phoenix, then you say Phoenix or Phoenix region, and then you fill in the blank, like who do you work with? B2B, high-tech companies that are looking for or can't tell a story. Or one of the favorite aha messages or CPOPs I got was miscommunication, one word, because it begs that's interesting. And then they went on, B2B companies that are not communicating effectively inside and outside the company. Oh, I got it, right? So the biggest reason for a shorter CPOP, if you don't say I do this or we do that, it's easier for the person who's hearing it to figure out who that might relate to.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is absolutely correct. And it's something that I've talked about to a number of my coaching members, the people that I work with, that it does two things. Number one, it breaks a paradigm. See, we often get into these routines where it's like, what's your name? What do you do? All right, we'll see you next networking event. What we do when we change it up a little bit, put it back to them or talk about the people that we serve, is we break this paradigm. And then number two is not only do we break the paradigm, but we anchor it. And that's what you're talking about. People are going to walk away going, I know who that Mitchell Levy guy is. He's the credibility guy, because we've now we've broken the paradigm and anchored it to this new idea and this new concept. And so while we walk through this for my law firm and for my business, each member listener to this podcast can go ahead and do the same thing for themselves. So now, Mitchell, we move on to the next topic of this global credibility, and this project that you're working on. And I want to ask you, share with us a story or two of some of the experiences that you've had that have kind of opened your eyes, something that you didn't expect when you first started interviewing these global experts on credibility.
So when we get to the superpower thing, I'll save my first superpower and I'll give you the second one now. My second superpower is building systems. So when I built the system to be able to handle 500 plus people coming through, what I did is I built the input and the output. I didn't build the black box, right? So if you think about life, let's for those listening, and assuming you're not driving, draw a box on a piece of paper. Call that the black box. Have a line that goes into the black box called input. Have a line that goes out of the black box called output. And by the way, anything you do in life, like the first question I asked Jake before we started is, what would be a great output of this interview? Well, I'm trying to figure out how do we navigate the black box in as much that he goes, oh my God, this is really cool, Mitchell, let's come back, right? Or whatever it is he says, right? So the interesting part is I built the inputs and outputs. The input being how they go through Calendly, how they get prepared, all the stuff that happens. The output are all the places we're going to be distributing it. We are now creating and I'll tell you two quick stories where we actually share it. And the interesting part is what comes out of it. Now, I defined an output. I'm going to tell you about Whitney Johnson, where we actually added to the output. So what happens, I didn't describe the black box. I didn't describe what I was going to keep track of. And as I started doing the interviews, what happened is people came late. And I'm like, maybe I should keep track of if they come late on time. People didn't watch the video or prepare. They go, oh, I've done hundreds of these before. I can do one. And then I ask the first question, then they'd stumble. I go, oh, maybe I should keep track if they prepare. I had the woman who runs the Women's Entrepreneurial Center for Babson College. When I was telling her about the statistics, she goes, what's the difference between men and women? I go, oh, maybe I should keep track of difference between men and women. And so right now, when you look at the numbers we're keeping track of, it's a beautiful, robust set of things. I didn't start that way. What happens with most entrepreneurs is they try to define the black box. Think about it as a lawyer, they try to come up with the when you're doing a partnership agreement, they try to describe everything that could possibly happen, and they spend months or years coming up with a contract, and they never do a deal together. For me, I'd rather do the deal first and then do the handshake and the deal first. And then if we want to do the next deal, then we do the contract.
Well, this reminds me of a little bit of a book coming out of Silicon Valley a number of years ago, Eric Ries's Lean Startup. And it's this idea of, it doesn't need to be perfect. You start, you get the momentum moving in a direction, and that will dictate some of the adjustments that you need to make. When Steve Jobs gave his commencement address at Stanford, he talked about how it's impossible to connect the dots looking forward, but looking back, you can connect the dots. You just told us a story about connecting the dots, looking back and saying, okay, I needed to add some data about who came on time, who prepared, who was male, who was female. But what you're saying is I could have sat and tried to come up with all of these questions and all of these statistics and all of this data ahead of time, and I would have just been stuck in neutral. I would have never got moving. And that, I think, is one of the big tragedies of entrepreneurship is we plan and we plan and we plan and we never execute. So much so that I've come up with the mantra that imperfect immediate action beats inaction every time.
Ditto. That's another good aha.
Well, you were going to talk about Whitney Johnson. We've had her on the show twice, provided we're talking about the same Whitney Johnson. She's amazing.
She is absolutely amazing. So Whitney and I have known of each other for 8 years. And when she got on, what typically happens is people who have prepared ahead of time, and Whitney absolutely did, will spend 10 minutes and I'll walk through the questions because a little bit of coaching is helpful because in this case, I have 5 structured questions. It's different than what we're doing now. And so then we do the interview, and then I have time afterwards to get a video testimonial. So I'm talking to Whitney. We have known of each other, but had never actually met, which was really shocking because in today's world, you see somebody, you comment on their stuff. I could have sworn we met, but we had never met. And we had a great interview. She's spectacular, as you know. And at the end, I said, Whitney, how about a quick video testimonial? And she said something that just blew me away. She said whatever accolades, this was fun, this was great. And she goes, and thank you, Mitchell, for letting me shoot my Credibility Sizzle Reel. So all of a sudden it hit me in the head and I just go, oh my God, this is really brilliant. But then I kept thinking about a speaker sizzle reel. This is not exactly that. So all I did is thanked her profusely and I gave it a couple of days to think about it. And then here's what I came up with. And now just, this was a short period of time. 2 weeks after she told me we have a product and we're selling it. So what happened is when you think about a speaker sizzle reel, it has to sizzle. That's what it does. You want to see the speaker on multiple stages doing multiple things. When you think about a credibility sizzle reel, it has to shine. You want the actual person who's being interviewed by the global credibility expert. You want them to shine. And that's what we've been doing. And so now we actually have a product where we're selling I've shortened it to a cred reel. So we have a product, we're selling the cred reel. And that just came out of Whitney's comment, which was absolutely beautiful.
Which you could have never done had you sat in your office with the door closed and tried to brainstorm all the great things that needed to happen in the future. It takes getting out, getting the boots on the ground. And so Now, Mitchell, one of the things you asked me before we hit record is, okay, what kind of output are you looking for? What's going to make this podcast absolutely amazing that it ranks among the favorites that you've done? And I said, it has a lot of stories, but it has some business lessons. I didn't mention one other thing, and that is we're going to lose track of time, which we absolutely have. This podcast, we try to get it around 30 minutes. We've already been going for that amount of time. And so, alas, we need to switch gears, jump to our final section, and probably schedule to have you back to finish this conversation at a later date. Sound like an okay plan?
I'd be honored.
All right. Our first question then for you, learning from leaders, where we ask just 4 quick questions. First one being, what is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading these days?
This is going to sound, this is truly not self-promotional. I am part of an anthology book called Turning Ideas into Impact. It has 16 thought leaders in it. And even though I was a publisher, I actually didn't read the content. Sounds bad for a publisher. I didn't read what the other people contributed. So I'm actually reading it. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. And I would imagine as you run different businesses, you can't know all the ins and outs of everything that's happening in your business. You got to trust your team to bring the right people together and do what needs to be done.
By the way, thank you for picking up the lesson from that story.
All right, our next question. We already got your first leadership superpower or your second one. How about sharing your first one with us?
It is pulling the genius out of somebody else's head.
You know, I love that, not just because of what it says, but the fact that you thought through it, you knew what you were talking about, and you came prepared to share what that is. And tell us, why is that such a great superpower, pulling genius from other people?
Oh, it is the 2 things that I apply both on the credibility episodes. The beautiful thing, somebody might come in with a CPOP and it might be 30 seconds long or 2 minutes long. And they've been toying with this for let's say 2 years. And then I give them something that's 5 words long and they go, oh my God, Mitchell, one pops to mind. I've been trying to fix this for 5 years and you just gave it to me in 10 minutes. That's a superpower. The second is, I do a 3-hour interview to help pull the genius from somebody's head for the books that we write. And it's because I care so much about really pulling out that beautiful insight that person has. And it's a second superpower. So I apply it for both the ghostwriting that we do and then for the interviews.
Yeah, those are both tremendous. Thank you for sharing. Our next question is a philosophy, quote, or mantra that you live by.
You know, I used to always say what you do and do what you say. I now say, show up when you show up.
And that's what this whole theme of this episode of the podcast. In fact, I believe that by the time we get this all edited and up on the website, we'll probably entitle it that, because that's really what I've taken away. That's my light bulb from this episode is, show up when you show up.
Oh, and I'm going to say, when your video guys go in, just say, instead of a light bulb, you can say the aha moment for the episode.
Right, because you're the aha guy, which we didn't share in the intro or in the bio, but the aha guy, Mitchell Levy, share with us the book that you most often recommend that other people read.
The funnest book, and it's probably 20 years old. A guy by the name of Jeffrey Cox wrote a book called Selling the Wheel. And I always thought, like, a salesperson's a salesperson, right? As smart as I thought I was, I always thought sales was sales. And Jeffrey Cox, it's a parable, similar to the Patrick Lencioni parables, where it just talks about 4 different styles of salespeople. And it is, if you really want to know what a salesperson is, and be able to identify what salesperson might work for you in your firm, you're going to want to read Selling the Wheel.
Well, and sales is such an important part of really any job, whether it's direct sales where you're overtly outselling or whether it's influence that you're trying to encourage someone to give you a good review or continue to pay their bill on time or whatever it is. A lot of us, all of us are in the sales game to some degree. So great recommendation. Mitchell, this has been a terrific episode. We've gone a little bit long, which is terrific for me, but probably some of our listeners need to get into work or get off the treadmill. So before we let them go and let you go, give us one last bit of advice and tell us, how can we find out more and continue this conversation?
So the piece of advice is, don't shout out what you do. shout out or let your customers shout out what you do. And so what I'll do is I'll say the best way to reach out is go to mitchellevy360.com. That's MITCHELLLEVY 360.com. The first thing you'll see is a customer video testimonial. That's a montage of, it's like a minute and a half of customers talking. You could also find the social media sites that you'd like to connect to, some of the other things that I do. And if this is of interest to you, if you have interest in either having your cred reel done, or to have us talk about ghostwriting a book, you could book time directly on my calendar. And you do that at mitchellevy360.com.
And we're going to link all that up on the show notes so they can go one-stop shop and find out all that information. And Mitchell, I'm going to register for a few minutes to get on your calendar and find out about this ghostwriting. We didn't talk much about it in this episode because we talked so much about credibility, but you do amazing things. Thank you for coming on and being this week's Modern Leadership guest expert.
Oh, it is my honor. And I just want to say thank you for being you, because it's so much fun to not go by the 10 questions I share and just talk what comes to heart at the time you're speaking. And it's a demonstration of credibility to you and the audience you serve. And thank you.
All right, my friends, what did you think of that? A credibility expert coming on the show, helping us out, and just a fun guy. I got to be honest with you, I'm recording this outro about an hour after the interview. And the reason for that is because Mitchell and I just stayed on the line and just talked. He walked me through writing a couple of books and the impact that it would be. And we set up some stuff to do in the future. So keep your eyes open for Mitchell Levy, great guest and a great friend. And we're going to be doing a lot moving forward. I just love his energy and what his companies are doing. If you want to learn more, if you want to find out more about this conversation that we've been having, of course, everything that we talked about, you can find on the show notes for this page, jakeacarlson.com/ML176, episode 176. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, everything is figure outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.